The Hustleshare podcast is sponsored by Aspire. Trusted by 15,000 businesses across Asia, Aspire offers a unified suite of financial services, allowing businesses to make fast international payments to 130-plus countries, global payments at the best FX rates, and open multi-currency accounts in US dollars, euros, Great British Pound, Singaporean dollars, Indonesian rupiah, and more. All accessible on via a single user-friendly platform, Aspire. And also by Uno Digital Bank, a full-spectrum digital bank licensed and regulated by the BSP. Manage your money and maximize its potential growth with a secure and trusted bank that fits right in your pocket. Open a savings or time deposit account, pay bills, shop with the Uno Virtual Debit MasterCard, or apply for a loan in the Uno mobile app today. The Hustleshare podcast is sponsored by Lark, the leading super app for work in Southeast Asia. Frustrated with juggling and paying for multiple tools for work? Hate mixing personal and business messages? Improve your team's productivity by 10 times with Lark, which combines business chat, email, video conferencing, calendar, project management, real-time translation, and much more into one super app. Trusted by companies like Xiaomi, Glints, Kumu, and Mamaluz. Get it for free at larksuite.com today. This podcast is brought to you by Salmon, your trusted source for all your financial needs. Whether you're looking for easy financing with low down payments and fast approval, or seeking high returns with their 8.88% interest on time deposits, Salmon has you covered. Visit salmon.ph today and discover how they can help you achieve your financial goals. Rural Bank of Santa Rosa Laguna Incorporated is regulated by the BSP. For any concerns, email consumeraffairs@bsp.gov.ph. Deposits are insured by PDIC up to 500,000 pesos per depositor.
I had an intern at the time who left BCG to go to Harvard for his master's degree, came back, and 2 years later, his startup was worth $1 billion.
What?
And that's the kind of thing that makes you question your life. Like, holy hell, my intern has a company that's worth $1 billion?
Welcome to Hustleshare, the podcast that features the daily grinds of unique hustlers around the world to show not our differences, but that our hustles are very much alike. Now here's your host, Ronster Baetiong.
Welcome to the latest episode of Hustleshare Podcast. Again, we are super duper excited because this guy hates PR. And before we pressed record, he's like, dude, I don't do PR, but I'm doing this to you as a favor. So I'm forever indebted to you for allowing me to do this. But again, I told you prior to the recording that I do have a bias because local founders can get it done. But local founders have a handicap whenever they do their startup. You need to put yourself in opportunities to win. Unfortunately, majority of the time, that's never going to come from here. But before we get carried away, I want to now introduce the co-founder and CEO of Ruralnet, Mr. Justin Arcenas. Whoop, whoop. Justin.
Thanks for having me on.
Finally, and again, super duper impressed. I've been wanting to get you on the show. I've been bugging Joanne Yao of Kickstart for the longest time. Like, "Hoy, Joanne, please intro me na to Justin since last year. I think last year, right? When you got funded by Kickstart again.
I can't believe it's been a year.
Right. First of all, that's a feat that's very hard to do. Okay, nowadays, I'm a former Kickstart investee. I got in very early in the game when there's a the fund was, I think, fund one pa lang. It's like they're fund one. and I'll just go into a tangent real quick. So apparently, I talked to my investors in Foxmont for Podcast Network Asia that I have a theory, and I needed to bounce it off of them. Like, hey, is it easier for funds to write checks during fund one? And they go, technically yes, because as they're more nascent, they're more loose on who they invest on, and as they become more mature, there's just more loops and holes that you're gonna have to go through. So by the fact that Kickstart invested in you in this iteration where they're writing checks for the likes of Wattpad and all that, That is super impressive. So again, massive, massive congratulations. It's a year late, but I've been wanting to say this to you for the longest time.
Thanks, Ron. And the funny part about this is nobody talks about how long it takes to get an investment sometimes. Because I started this company back in 2017. A
Wow.
very, very different vision from what I was doing today. And I've known Joanne for that long. So actually fundraising for us has not been like, talking to people and then wrapping it all up quickly. It's been about knowing people in the community and
Yep.
just being there and building stuff. And when the time was right, getting to talk to these people again and saying, hey, since the first time we talked X number of years ago, look at all we've built.
Correct. Exactly. And that's what startup founders should actually build. Focus on building and actually building, turning your startup into a real business at startup scale. That's what people always forget. People forget scale. Now people is like, yeah, I'm a profitable startup. At what scale, dude? At startups, by default, need to be ambitious. Because if you're solving a micro problem and you have a micro solution, great, you have a lifestyle business. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't call it a startup, because at the end of the day, a tech startup will always think of scale and startup speed. But before I get carried away, Justin, again, tangent again, my bad. I'm just super excited to talk about this. I need to ask you the $1 million question. Justin, what's your hustle?
So for us, a lot of what we've been working on, and this is a very interesting take on the startup business because you always mention talking about scale. And I come from starting this work with Ruralnet from a very different sense of scale that you're thinking of with the startup community. And initially, a lot of Ruralnet's work was actually social impact work.
Oh.
And scale and social impact means something completely different from scale in the startup world. When you're talking about scale in the startup world, you're thinking, how many millions of users can I reach? How many millions of dollars have I raised? How much millions of dollars of revenue have I made? But in the social impact world, it's how many millions of lives have you touched, right? How many people have you impacted? How many lives have you actually changed? And sometimes the actual end number doesn't need to be that big, but the impact that you make has to be massive. So it's a very different sense of scale that we talk about in that scenario. And we're a bit unique at Ruralnet for being both still a social impact business until today. It's still part of our KPIs all the way up to the senior management level. It's still part of our company mission and vision. But at the same time, we're also venture backed. So it's a weird dynamic and a strange line that we have to walk. But that's the hustle that I've chosen to make, right? Is if you want to be able to make a huge difference in both sides, both the millions of dollars and the millions of lives, I wanted to try and balance the two. And so a lot of what we're working on today is trying to reach out to the millions and millions of Filipinos who don't have access to insurance and the social safety net that provides.
Yep, that's amazing. And that's the thing. Again, that already says to you why this is a tech startup play. Whether it's a social angle or a venture angle, it's the sheer ambition of what you're trying to do. You mentioned millions, right? We're talking ambition of changing the world and making it a better place using your product or solution. So that is scale. By default, you can meander through different paths, but the ambition and the problem we're trying to solve is massive, especially for scaling. Again, so we will talk about that and discuss how you're getting that done. But I need to understand first the origin story of one Justin Arcenas. But I need to buckle up real quick because this is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride because we're going to ride the Hustleshare time machine. Alrighty, and we're back now from where we are. Again, thanks so much, Justin, for hanging tight. But Justin, I want to understand. So I also have a bias. Okay, I always saying. So let me know if this is correct or wrong. But you are based in Cebu, correct?
Yes, I am. The company is based out of Cebu.
Okay, so first of all, whenever people say that there's not enough great startups in Cebu, this is obviously wrong because we have an amazing startup based and also made in Cebu that scales. Because we always say, hey, everything's in Manila, the funding's in Manila, blah, blah, blah. Look, at what Justin is there. And again, he's allergic pa to PR to all these things. He just hustled, but amazing thing. But Justin, I want to understand, what was your very first exposure to hustling that you remember?
It was really it's where every hustler starts, right? I remember growing up and selling comic books as a kid, candies, comic books, toys, anything I could get a hand on and turn a profit on, I would.
Wow.
So I remember one of my family always tells me about it. I have vague memories of this, but I remember back at the time, I don't know if you remember when Beyblades were this really flashy thing. Like, yeah, every kid absolutely loved them, right?
Yep.
And I had relatives out in the US and in Japan, and when we would travel, I saw a stack of them on sale there for apparently what was at the time around 300, 400 pesos.
Yep.
And I knew how much they were going for in Cebu, which is around 1,500. So I was like, I'm going to make a mint. I filled all my luggage allowance with just stacks and stacks and stacks of Beyblades. Went back to Cebu, sold them to anyone who would take their hands on. I'd hang around the toy shop on the weekends, just showing my wares like a flea market vendor. And yun, I remember my the yaya at the house was quite worried because one time I left my wallet on the table and there's 20,000 pesos on it, and she was like, "Why is this kid? This kid's totally just stealing from his parents, because there's no way he should be carrying around this much money in his wallet." But yeah, that's the hustle.
Technically, you were early on a Beyblade smuggler.
Walang taxes yan. Walang puhunan din because it was, I kindly charged it to family funds, right?
Okay, but the proceeds are all yours. Wow, 100%. Nice margin.
100% margin. Great hustle. I just had to treat them to dinner, which eventually naubos din yung pera. So that's the other lesson in all of this. Like, if you get free money and it seems like a really good deal, watch out for the hidden terms and conditions.
Yep, there's always a catch right there. Yep. So, okay, that's amazing. But you already had that touch of really finding opportunities and things that you're passionate about. But after all these hustle that you did, where else did you see hustling that influenced you to hustle like this as well early on in your life?
I think it's very much a family thing. And talking a little bit about my background, my family members were, at least on my dad's side, at my grandfather's age, they weren't formally trained business people, but they had a lot of businesses, right? My grandfather was a doctor, and my lola would literally just find anything that would sort of go along with that business. Like, oh, if he's a doctor, sige, open tayo ng pharmacy para you can make money from that side of doing things. Oh, he's well connected in the business community because at the time, there were very few general practitioners who were very well trusted. So he said, okay, let's buy a small bank. Let's get a small bank. And again, that's very different in the context of 1960 than it is now, right?
Absolutely.
It can truly be a really small entity then. And it was always, I grew up in this environment where my Lola was always hustling and my dad was always hustling and always looking for opportunities. And they were always very encouraging of that, which is why as a kid, they were like, oh, sige, gawa ka ng negosyo, whatever you want, we'll fund it within reason, right?
Of course.
For your little childhood hustles. And I think that's really helpful, like growing up in that kind of environment where risk taking is encouraged. Right?
Yeah.
But also, if you take a loss, kasalanan mo yan. That's on your own.
That bucks up with you. You can't blame me that you failed, right? Take it on. So that's just amazing because you're right. Vast majority of Filipino or average Filipino households, the narrative, and this is where I grew up onto. Though my mom hustled a lot, but the mindset was to make ends meet, to get by, right? Not to take risk, right? And most of the time, the typical narrative of a Filipino parent is like, the only thing I can inherit for you or leave you by is a good education, which is true. Everybody needs that. However, if early on you're given the opportunity to actually take risks, that, oh, okay, there's an option outside of employment, that totally changes the whole point of view that you have in the world. And I'll jump into this down the road, but I want to understand because one of your first few hustles was freaking consulting in BCG, right? But the other thing before that too, obviously, is you studied also in Singapore. With that mindset and of course education in Singapore, how did that come through? Because I'll always say this, and I said it to you before we started out. I'll just go on a mini rant right now because there's some bullshit in Startup PH that's been going on. There's a bunch of dudes giving shit to Kaya founders because they're trying to attract PhilAm or Phil Foreign, whatever, talent to go back to the country. We need that shit because they're the ones or the only people that have seen scale and have actually done it. If it's just going to be us locals with locals, I've seen that happen before. Okay, when this ecosystem started out in 2010, all the way to like 2014, 2015, it's local on local crime. What happened? Did anyone actually make it out? No, it's us. Crab mentalitying everyone. And it's the same people trying to do that same narrative. You need to go out to see what's possible and apply that to do it here. Similar to how the Japanese did it when they were trying to do the tech stuff before. Their engineers was sent overseas. They went back home to do amazing tech stuff. Now look at them. So same with Korea. They sucked in electronics before. They had to send them worldwide to win. And they came back, did thing. Why is it an evil thing? So you did that similarly, but very early on in SMU in Singapore. How did that opportunity come about and what did you learn and what was the hustle like being a student in Singapore?
Well, I think a lot of things, unpacking that. And first of all, I want to say that I absolutely agree, right? And throughout my experience working overseas, I was out of the country for almost 10 years before I moved back. And without that overseas experience, I would not have had the vision to do what I'm doing now.
Yep.
And I think more importantly, I wouldn't have thought that what I were doing now would be possible, right? So you're absolutely right. Being out there, seeing what other people have done was absolutely essential for me to have the kind of viewpoint that I do now and the ambition to do what I'm doing. And I think absolutely we need more people who have seen that. And for me, it doesn't matter if they're coming from local or coming from overseas.
Doesn't matter. What color of your skin is, it doesn't. What your last name is, what doesn't matter.
Absolutely. The question is whether you can see and find those opportunities and whether you can believe in yourself enough to sort of make for that. And so, well, that was a side tangent, when I moved to Singapore, it was 2007, right? It was very early on. And at the time, Singapore had this great program where they were doing student bonds, right? And scholarships, where they were encouraging other people to come on from ASEAN and study in Singapore and work in Singapore. They'd give as much as a 70% discount on your education if you just stayed in Singapore to work for 3 years.
Yep.
And if a country like Singapore says of their own talent pool, hey, we have a highly educated community, but we still want the best of Southeast Asia to come into Singapore to learn and to, give them time to work in Singapore and fall in love with the life there and to stay. If even Singapore is trying to attract that kind of talent, like we should absolutely be encouraging that here.
Yep.
Because the people that I met there, who I went through the scholarship, are most of the most brilliant people that I know, right? And it absolutely worked in getting people and from all across the region who are both really smart and also had that hustle and that grind, who are willing to go above and beyond to make things work and to get a better education.
Yep.
And I think that level of drive was something that I saw was very, very different with those scholars and with a lot of people on that bond. And I think without that, sorry, let me rephrase that. A lot of the Filipinos who I know went as well there are back in the Philippines at either, senior management at big local conglomerates or running their own businesses. So it was definitely very helpful to be in an environment where you're encouraged to strive harder and do better because the people around you are really good.
Yeah, and force you to level up.
Exactly, right? And the best way to level up is knowing that the guy beside you is doing better than you are, right? I mean, if you're in a small pool and you're always like the best in your community, sure, I mean, that's great for the ego and all, but it doesn't push you to do better. But knowing that
Exactly.
you're in the bottom 50% half of the time, oh man, that's what really drives you to go like, oh, I need to step it up. I need to
Right.
push myself even further. And I think that's what Singapore was for me.
No, and that's true. And again, very reminiscent of the startup ecosystem. Because if it's just us local founders without any foreign influence, whatever that form might be, Philam, white, black, green, blue, what doesn't matter. But if it's just us, I've seen the very early stages of the startup ecosystem where it's just a small plant. Everybody's like, hey, you're doing well. Wow, you have $20,000. Amazing job. Bruh, it ain't gonna work. You gotta level up like, hey, how can we do it like Shopee? How can we do it like Grab? And how come all the best apps on your phone are never Filipino till now? Ask yourself that. We're all ASEAN or whatever, but how come we can't do it? And you have to influence yourself by stepping up to the bar that's out there, not being just here. But in that context, Justin, sorry, before we take our first break, you were there, you had to force yourself to level up. But there's other nuances. I assume you lived alone. What did you learn about yourself by going through that experience and also basically forcing yourself to be an adult very early on?
I think it was great, right? Being overseas, living by yourself, gives you this really nice blend of that sense of independence that you get as an expat, where you have yourself to rely on and you need to go on your own and be able to take care of everything yourself. From the big things to the small things, right?
Yep.
Your financials, right? Especially like as a teenager going into your young adulthood, if you grow up and live in the same place and you live with your family the whole time, you never learn how to manage your own finances. You don't know how to budget. You don't know how to, because there's always something to fall back on.
It's a safety net.
It's a safety net, right? And living abroad, you still have that safety net, right? It's not like you can't reach out to your family if anything goes wrong. But nakakahiya, di ba?
Right.
You don't want to be the one who's saying like, oh, hey, can you wire me some money because I accidentally spent half of it because I wasn't thinking about my own.
Too much bakote.
But bakote was not the thing that started with the B that I spent the most on in Singapore.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, you get this chance to be by yourself, to learn how to manage the responsibilities of life by yourself, but you still have that safety net to come back to at home. So I think having that combination of both was really helpful. But the second thing about living overseas is that it gets you a really good sense of perspective that I think that you don't get here. And I find it so funny sometimes when I talk to some Filipinos who are like, oh, I can't believe, you want to stay in the Philippines for the long run. There's all these problems and, we don't like the way that things are being run, or there's not enough opportunities here in the Philippines. And it's so much better to go overseas. And I'm coming from overseas and I'm like, no, the Philippines is great. What are you talking about? There's so much to do here. There's so much to see and so much to be able to achieve that you can't do outside. And having that outside perspective, I think, was one of the most helpful things about living overseas from a young age, because you meet people, especially in Singapore, from all over the place, all over Southeast Asia and South Asia. And it gives you that network of people for later on in your life. But it also gave me a chance to sort of see, oh, all those things that I don't like about the Philippines, that's not something that's just the Philippines. That's everywhere, man.
Correct.
And when you talk about the opportunities that they're seeing in their spaces, you're going like, hey, why can't we do that in the Philippines? If they're doing that there, why can't we do that here? And so the sense of perspective, I think, is exactly what was helpful. It's not necessary to have a great startup, but I think it totally was a huge boost.
No, totally. Absolutely. And last question, Let, sorry, before we take our first break. One thing I really want to do this, and I can now actually tell because of how well you enunciate and how you actually stitch your thoughts. You're part of the debate team in SMU. Aside from being, again, in operations management, trade and finance, and also graduating with high merit. But for the people, I've had people here who are former debaters, RJ Ledesma, part of the debate team, Iba, Rasul, Bernardo, Backworks, former debaters. But it's been a while since I've had a debater here. How did that help your perspective? It's because at the end of the day, everything is about communication and discourse. But how did debating help you, especially overseas? Because here, kasi, Filipinos get, they go to ad hominem right away, ad nauseum, all these fantasy right away, and just again, just doing a lot of emotional stuff. But if Singapore, I assume it's not that. It's a different type of environment.
So this is where I'm going to be slightly stereotypical and talk about national differences.
Okay.
It's really funny because in the debate scene in Singapore, you can clearly tell if you're to transcribe any of these arguments, any of these debates without hearing their voices. I could tell you exactly which country they were from.
Really? Okay. How?
It's amazing. So if you go to a debate with an Indian, it will be point, all in a row, all rapid fire, as much argument as is feasible to fit within the 7 minutes that you are allocated until the last possible minute clocks and the adjudicator goes, hey, no, you're done, right? And it's basically this, I think it's a very cultural thing. It's where I want to show that I am more prepared and have more to say than you do. And I will overpower your argument by sheer volume of counterpoints. Right?
Okay.
And then we would have the UK or Australian debaters who were not as structured. It wouldn't be like A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. They'd meander around, right? It seems like they'd go wherever the flow would take them. But at the end of the day, you'd listen to their argument, and after they'd get to barely 7 minutes of talking and then clock out. I'm done. But afterwards, you'd actually remember everything that they said. Right? Even if they don't have 8 minutes worth of content, probably like they'd had half the content of an Indian debater. But you would remember everything that they said without looking at your notes as a judge afterwards. It's a very different style. And then you'd have the Singaporeans who were very logical and structured. Like I could see in my head the bullet points and also the sub-tab that you get. It's like, okay, here's A1, A2, A2-1, right? You can tell that it's going by a script. It's very easy to follow, but it didn't have also some of that sense of like flow that some of these other debaters would have. And all of these different styles, I think, were very helpful to me going later on into consulting and into professional.
Yes.
Because it tells you exactly how people will listen to you and what they'll retain from what you say.
Wow. That's amazing. And again, those heavy nuances, especially in a melting pot like Singapore, matters a lot. Because that's the best training ground already for you to actually see what happens in a workplace. Right? If people are going to debate me, and debates will happen, arguments will happen, discourse would happen, and that's amazing. And I'm pretty sure that benefited you throughout your career. Now let's take our first break, and when we come back, we will now talk about how again Justin brought all of that into BCG, Shopee, and of course creating Ruralnet. Well, let's talk about that more after the break. Hey hustlers, how are companies like Pizza Hut, Tech in Asia, and Love Bonito saving $28,000 a year? Well, Aspire is an all-in-one finance solution designed for modern businesses. Over 15,000 companies across Asia are using Aspire to streamline business financial processes, saving both time and money. Now, Aspire understands the demand of your business, and these are their offers. Lightning fast international transfers enabling money movement across 130 plus countries, the best FX rates with no hidden fees ensuring transparency, and multi-currency accounts in US dollars, euros, Great British pounds, Singaporean dollar, Indonesian rupiah, and more, facilitating transactions in multiple currencies. And guess what? Opening an account can be done 100% online, making access to a global business account effortless. Aspire works with thousands of startups across Asia, offering an easy way to open a business account to receive investments from VCs. Aspire is backed by global top-tier VCs including Sequoia and Y Combinator and has been recognized by CB Insights as one of the top 100 most promising fintechs globally. Join over 15,000 businesses across Asia that have already made the switch to Aspire and experience the future of business finance. For more details, visit aspireapp.com. That's ASPIREAPP.com. Again, that's aspireapp.com. And let's make business finance simple, integrated, and borderless together. Hey hustlers, money issues and financial stress are a reality we all face, and ignoring them won't make them disappear. That's why our sponsor, Salmon, is committed to making managing your finances easy and more accessible. With Salmon financing, you can shop to over 2,000 Salmon partner stores nationwide and bring home your dream purchases today with a low down payment starting at just 10%. Plus, it's super easy to apply. Just one valid ID is needed and you can get approved right then and there. No need to wait for payday. Just take what you need now and pay for it over time. And if you're someone that's looking for ways to grow your money, Salmon's time deposit accounts at the Rural Bank of Santa Rosa, Laguna, which is regulated by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, offers a fantastic 8.88% interest rate for a 12-month term for deposits of more than 500,000 pesos. That's currently the highest rate in the Philippines. Deposits are also insured by the PDIC with up to 500,000 pesos per depositor, so you know your money is safe and secure. It's definitely a great way to make your money work harder for you effortlessly. Since launching in 2022, Salmon has raised over $60 million and is backed by industry giants like the IFC, ADQ, and Northstar Group, ensuring they're a reliable partner in your financial journey. So whether you need financing, credit, or high-return savings option, Salmon has you covered. So visit salmon.ph today to see how they can help you achieve your financial goals with ease. Again, that's salmon.ph. Finance made easy with Salmon. And we're back from the break. We are still with Justin Arcenas, who then told us the amazing journey he did as a student. But before I start and talk about BCG, obviously, because again, every BCGer, the Paulo Camposes of the world, the Brian Cruz of the world, the E.R. Rolians of the world, and shout out to Anthony Ovijan as well, who heads BCG, went through a rigorous past. But before we start talking about BCG, I want to understand the hard parts of being a student in Singapore, because it for sure wasn't easy. I mean, it sounds fun, nice and fun, but it's a competitive landscape out there. Where did you struggle with there while studying in Singapore?
So Singapore is, as you said, it's a very naturally competitive environment. For better or for worse, wala yung pakikisama ng Filipino culture. There we like, okay, we want to do our best. And if we're working in a group, we'll work together to do our best. But if we're not working in a group, it's every man for himself, right?
Yep.
And I think one of the challenges that was really present in Singapore was getting used to that kind of culture. If you're coming from, and I come from a very small high school in Cebu. For context, there were like 24 people in my batch. When we graduated. Not even like one classroom.
That's a small pond. A really small pond.
It's a very small pond. So moving from there into like a very competitive environment, you can imagine it's a big adjustment that you have to make. Right?
Yeah.
But I think it was super helpful as well, because when we're talking with people who were in my batch and who are coming from Davao or Cagayan de Oro. Again, I would hear the same things from them, right? It's that, okay, you come from a very small pond and you're used to being the best, right? In your very small pond. Not bragging, it's not as hard to be the best in a group of 20.
There's just 23 other dudes that you're going to have to beat, though. Yeah.
And I wasn't even the best in my group of 24 dudes, right? So, and then going into an environment where every single person was like, we had people from Singapore who were like, I not only went to grade school and high school in Singapore, which is also a very competitive environment with their O levels and A levels. You have standardized tests throughout the whole thing. So it's very rigorous and very numbers based. So everyone's lives seem to be defined by these numbers. Like, how well did you do in your O levels? How well did you do in your A levels?
Wow.
And then they go to junior high because they feel that they're not ready for university yet because they're not equipped enough. And that takes another 2 years of schooling in top shelf academic institutions, and then they go for national service if they're guys. So that's 2 years of military training.
Yeah.
That's the discipline of that. And so they come out, they're 21 years old, right? They've gone through a full 13, sometimes 14 years of education. And
they're ready to kill.
The same class as you are, right? With your, well, at the time, six years of grade school, 4 years of high school. And they're like, all right, let's go. You have to compete against these guys.
Yikes.
So the difference in maturity and the difference in readiness,
Yeah.
you can tell that that's there sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And it is very interesting to have to really fight uphill in that kind of environment. And I absolutely think that every Filipino who went through that batch was absolutely able to do as well or better than their local counterparts, because I think we also sent our best, right? I mean, a lot of the people who could afford to go there were able to qualify for the scholarships or the bonds, absolutely deserve to make the cut.
Absolutely.
But you had to be in that mindset where you had to put in that effort and you had to really think about what you're doing and play to your strengths.
Yep. And there's no other palakasan. It's purely meritocratic, right?
Yep.
You earn your keep in that environment, and you're surrounded by the top dogs of what the region can give. And that's amazing. Now, okay, let's talk about BCG, because it's going to be similar in nature. The only difference now is you're solving problems over the biggest companies, and you work for one of the top four, big three, big four. I forgot the number, but it's easily big three in the consulting industry. How did you get this opportunity, and what was that experience like, and how did that again change your perspective? Because the proof is in the pudding. The best startup, I can already probably name 5 right away, top of my head. I already said some of the names earlier. Our VC World or a tech startup, our BCG founded, or BCG alum founded. What was that experience like working in BCG?
Well, I think there's one thing, because I think you're mentioning over the break that people want to hear. It's not about the end state, but about the journey, right?
Yes.
And even getting to BCG was a very funny story, because I remember graduating from university and thinking, okay, I have a great degree, did pretty decently in college, not top of the shelf, not summa cum laude or anything, but enough to like qualify, come from a good background. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, all right, I'm ready to go into the workplace. I'm ready to start working. And then I spent 6-8 months unemployed.
What?
And I was applying for every single job. At first, I was like, these are the things that I want to work in. Let me apply to these spaces. And by the end of the 6 to 8 months, I was like, dear God, who will take me? Literally anything. I was like sending 10, 15, 20 resumes a day. It's like, please, somebody take me.
Oh my
God.
I
remember my family was telling me, like, much after, they were laughing at me, because they're like, at one point, I apparently called home. I was like, should I just come home? Like, I can't get a job. It's so difficult. Yeah. And a lot of my friends were unemployed. This was at the end of the financial crisis, by the way.
That's why.
Which is a horrible time to graduate. But I guess the lesson is, right, it's not like I walked into BCG. Yeah. It was 6 to 8 months of failing to even get any job, period.
But how did you get the top, dude? BCG though. How did that opportunity open up?
So after 6 to 8 months of unemployment, I ended up interning for a bunch of different places in a row, and that also took me pretty much everywhere. So I did some biofuel work out of Semarang in Indonesia. Okay. I'd never been to Semarang before, but I was working in the Singapore arm all the way in Tuas, which is like the far end of Singapore. And they're like, oh, we need kind of help with our operations all the way in Indonesia, in Semarang, in the second tier city. Can you go there for 2 months and help us fix our shipping problems? And they're like, okay, I guess I'll go. It's not like I'm much else. So I get shipped off there for a couple of months, come back. I end up interning with the Pan Pacific Hotel Group, working on investment evaluation for new hotels.
Okay.
Literally like anything I could get my hands on, just to keep busy and just to get some experience. Okay. And at the end of like a year from graduation, and I'm still applying this whole time, by the way, because I don't want to be in forever.
Right.
So at least I was trying to get stuff under my belt in a very tough employment environment. Yeah. And then BCG reached back out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to schedule you for an interview." So I'm like, "Great, happy to do so." And I was this close to moving back to the Philippines for good because I could not find anything. I was like literally like 3-4 weeks away from doing so. And I interviewed with them. And I also interviewed for a final role with Pan Pacific Hotel Group because they're quite happy with my work. And I go home at the end of my internship for 2 weeks, and I get both offers. BCG.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, of course, I really want to work in BCG, right? That's way, by far, the better opportunity.
Yeah.
And then I look at the offer, and I'm like, why does it say Jakarta? I live in Singapore. I interviewed in Singapore. Like, hold up.
Curveball.
Like, why does it say Jakarta? I have never been to Jakarta in my life, right? Even getting to Semarang, there's a direct flight from Singapore, so I didn't even have to transit through Jakarta.
Okay.
So I was like, hold up. Wild
Maybe Indonesia is really where you're gonna be drawn into. There you go.
Yeah. And so I sit down and I talk with Martin Gonzalez, great guy, one of my early mentors. He now works for Google in San Francisco. But he was one of the other Filipinos who was working there in Jakarta. And I was basically asking him, like, what's it like working in Jakarta, working with BCG? And also, what's with Jakarta? And he's like, don't worry, because there's no Manila office. They send all the Filipinos there.
Not yet, at least during that time.
Not yet at the time. There's a lower cost of operations compared to like hiring them out of Singapore. And they send a lot of them to Manila anyway to work on projects while there's no office there yet. So when I heard that, I was like, okay, you know what? It's a great opportunity. I'm just going to throw the dice. What's the worst that can happen, right? I'm moving to a new place, somewhere I've never been. And where I don't speak the language. But it's going to be an adventure. Why not? And so I went. And I absolutely don't regret it. I think Jakarta in 2012 to 2015 was one of the best places to be from a startup founder's perspective.
Yeah, dude. Gojek, Tokopedia, you name it.
Yep.
Everything was there. Bukalapak, So
exactly.
There. So what was that experience like? So this is also because Podcast Network Asia, when we expanded there during the pandemic, I remember this being said about who also started the startup push in Jakarta. Guess what? Who did it? It's the Sea Turtles of Indonesia. It's Indonesians, full-blooded, half-blooded, doesn't really matter, studied overseas, learned overseas. Some of them pa nga was actually Paulo Campos's classmate. The founder of Gojek was Paulo Campos's freaking classmate in school. Right? They went back and did their shit there. Was they? Oh, I'm Indonesian American. Blah blah. No, they didn't. They just got their shit done. But because now, same different perspective. But you being in there, what was that like? In that during that really exciting time, because you've experienced it firsthand.
Right. So I think there's a couple of things. And one thing that I absolutely love about being in BCG Jakarta in that time period was that a lot of the founders and senior management of many of the big startups in Indonesia actually went through BCG. So very, very early on, while I was still there, we had people leaving to join Tokopedia when it was still growing as senior management. People who joined Traveloka.
Wow.
There were 6 or 7 people who all left. Like we had one principal who left and became a C-level member of Traveloka, and then pulled 5 or 6 other guys with him. It's like, all right, we're gonna build this massive thing together, and we need good talent. And all sorts of numbers of founders of people who were later on acquired by Grab and Gojek. All right, firms like Rurma and Kudo, who were really big at the time. I don't think you're familiar now. But at the time, it was like, oh, wow, there's actually people who are willing to be bought out for $100, $200 million. Right?
What? That's generational wealth, though.
2016, right? So I was like, wow, okay, so that's something that's really possible. And so the nice thing about working with BCG then was, of course, it's a really rigorous environment. You're working crazy hours on some of the toughest problems with really, really brilliant people. And then when the really brilliant people leave and start their own thing or start working for these tech companies, you catch up with them in coffee and they're like, oh, what are you doing now? And I kid you not, one of the things that was the most sobering thing for me was I had an intern at the time who left BCG to go to Harvard for his master's degree, came back, and 2 years later, his startup was worth $1 billion.
What?
And that's the kind of thing that makes you question your life. Like, holy hell, my intern has a company that's worth $1 billion? Like,
which startup was this?
It was what is Jet's company's name? I think it's Pintu. It's the first major crypto exchange out of Indo.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But okay, there's something in the water in BCG. Okay. What is that training that you guys get that, man, I already know that whoever's BCG right now, it's just a matter of time when they decide to become a founder or to start something up. There's a high chance. And that's why they keep getting the checks. Why? Because if you're a VC, these guys are already used to solving problems, not just from a microscopic level. What I love about the BCG boys that I always see is from a macro pa lang, they understand the problem more than anyone. More than a local would, actually, majority of the time, because they don't understand the GDP per capita type of stuff. Like, you throw that to a local, huh? What are you talking about? I just know that there's a problem in the sari-sari store at the canto somewhere. They understand the nuance, but they don't understand the macro, the unit economics and everything. But what do they put you through that keeps churning out founders on founders on founders that are bankable in BCG?
Right. And this is where I'm also going to go on a mild tangent as well, right?
Go lang.
I think you are understating the importance of the local nuance. And I'm saying this from my hat in social impact.
Okay.
And I'll say this because this is something that I feel very, very strongly about in my social impact hat, is that local nuance is just as important as the big picture thinking in creating a solution. You need both. Don't get me wrong.
Correct. And it's not zero sum. People think kasi it's zero sum.
Yes. It's absolutely not. So one of the stories I always like to tell was there's this NGO that was doing these weird water pumps, right, in Africa.
Okay. And
they got millions of dollars in grant funding because the way they're setting up is that they have these little, what do you call those? Those things that spin for kids, the merry-go-rounds.
Ah.
Right? The ones where you run around the playground. And
Yeah.
Right? And they were like, oh, if kids are going to be playing, we can use that rotational energy to pump water. And we're going to provide clean water. Yeah, like a centrifuge. Like to pump clean water for the community, right? And we're going to harness the power of kids playing and turn it into fresh water for the community.
That's what the Egyptians did also in ancient Egypt to harness the power of human labor.
Yeah. So I think you've hit the nub of it, right? It's human labor. And so all the donors saw was this like, oh, children playing, clean water for the community. This is a great idea. We're going to fund this all over the place. And you know what actually happens in the local nuance?
Okay.
Kids don't play all the time, right?
No, they get tired.
It's like, okay, when they're free, and especially in developing economies, a lot of them work on farms and with their family or on official stuff with house chores. And pumping water is something you do first thing in the morning, right? As your day starts, you need to pump water. And so they put millions of dollars into these playthings, and you have kids who are being forced around to run around and play on these things.
That's child labor right there.
In the morning. Instead of just pumping a well. And the funny part is like you have it's for a lot of developing economies, it's the women whose job it is to fetch water.
Oh man, now you involve the moms too.
And you have these absurd pictures of moms who are spinning on this Playmobil thing just so that water comes out. And so look, and this is a huge tangent, but I think that's why it's really important to have the local context about what you're doing. Because if you don't have that local context for a problem, it's very easy to take a solution that seems great from overseas and just say, why can't we do that here? But a lot of the times, there's a very good reason why it can't be done exactly the same way abroad as here. And I think that's why people who have seen both sides of the coin are very important, because you can't just take something from overseas and transplant it wholesale and expect it to work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also just can't see your own little pond. You need to see what's out there and tweak that to the local context.
Correct. Totally understand. And okay, now when these are the ones that the BCG teaches you. Is there a formula, or is there like a method to the madness that you put you through? Because here's the thing, again, being clairvoyant, you kind of did a shift after that, and you became the head of business development in Shopee before you started Ruralnet. But what was there a formula over how you look at the thesis, at least from a macro, and then of course hustle through the micro?
Right. So one of the things that they teach you in every case interview is the infamous market sizing question, right?
Tam.
How many golf balls are there in all of North America? How many golf balls are sold a year in North America? And that's where you really go through, where you realize every problem can be solved through application of the macro, right? You start from the big picture, how many people are there in the country, then you start filtering out like how many of those people play golf, right? And how often do they play golf? How many times do they lose a ball per match? And eventually you come up to these TAM numbers. And I think that kind of TAM training as a method to that madness is a great way of establishing, should I be working on this problem or not? It's not accurate in any means, way, or form, but it tells you directionally, divide by 10, multiply by 10. Is it something that's worth going after, right? And having, I guess, that in mind the whole time that you're working on a problem really gives you clarity. Because when you're working with a big consulting company, right, the fees are also correspondingly enormous for your client.
Yep.
So they want to see value being driven.
Correct.
For the project. And so if you're thinking it from a consulting background, I was working on a procurement case, for example, and the target that was assigned to me for our local company was, can you save 100 million pesos? Not the team, by the way. That's me, right?
Yep.
Multiply all the members of the team. And so when you start thinking about it that way, you have to really zero in. Okay, where are the big things that need to be solved? Where can I make a difference? And I will spend my time only on that. Because if you were to try and look at every single thing, every single problem, voila.
Yeah, it's whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
And the next thing then is like, okay, once you've zeroed in on that big thing, you've said that, okay, this is the thing that I want to work on. That's where the micro stuff happens. And that was super helpful to me as well, working in consumer goods specifically. I was very much a consumer goods person. Worked a lot with ER, Roland, and with Shiv on the consumer goods bit. And
you got to work with them while they were still there?
Yeah, absolutely.
What? Shout out to them. Okay.
So yeah, it's a very tight-knit community. And we were working in different markets for consumer goods. And a lot of the work for consumer goods is actually going down to the ground. Talking to people, seeing the numbers. Literally, like, I remember one of the big insights I got working on milk in one of these Southeast Asian countries is that, I don't know if you're familiar with condensada.
Of course. I was born in the hood, bro. Condensada and ebap combo, bro. That's it.
Yeah, condensada and ebap. Did you know condensada is not actually milk?
Yes.
Right?
Because I don't get lactose intolerant with that shit.
So the difference between good condensada and small and like cheap condensada is the emulsifiers that go into it. And this is my favorite little fact, is that if you set really cheap condensada out in the sun for too long, it'll actually split into the milk and the oil.
Wow.
I remember talking to cafe owners in Myanmar of all places, and they were like, yeah, none of us have refrigerators or anything, right? And it's annoying to me now that if I prepare a drink and I let it sit on the counter for long enough, the oil comes out to the top, and no one wants to fix that. And so the selling point for the product was literally like, it will not split. So that's a kind of local context. It's like, that would have made sense nowhere else in the world because they wouldn't leave the drinks out to sit on counters. They wouldn't be worried about the heat, the sunlight coming in. And it's all these micro details, but it made the product a huge success, right?
Wow.
Oh, it's a very simple selling process. Why am I paying 10 more cents for this brand of milks? Because it won't split when you serve it to a customer. Bam.
Right. Boom. Right there. So again, I love it. We can go on tangent, have a BCG episode, but let's talk about Shopee. Okay. So at this point, 2015, 2016, Shopee, Lazada, I was former Groupon. So I was seeing the very first, again, you can call me a second generation founder. Okay. So I did that too. I learned how to sell in Groupon. And that also changed my perspective that, you know what, I built confidence that, you know what, I can sell select products for myself. Of course, there's so many more nuances and skills that I had to unlock. And of course, experience. But I had tech experience. But when you did Shopee in 2015, 2016, it's not what we know now. Delivery is an issue still. People are not used to paying online yet. But being the head of business development, what was that like? And what was it like going back home full time now?
So I think I'll say one thing before we go on, and it's my target for the first week.
Okay.
My target for the first week was 20 orders a day for Shopee.
Are you kidding me?
That's the whole app, by the way. That's not just me. That was the whole app. So I was like,
wow, that's done in a microsecond right now.
So you can imagine it was literally 5 of us in a tiny Rigos office. I joined 2 weeks before the app launched in the Philippines. So when I joined, wala pa yung app.
Okay.
So we weren't even talking about, are people used to delivery or all of that. It's like literally like, who are you guys? Literally never heard of you before, right? Why should I be selling on your app instead of on Instagram, which is where people were actually selling at the time?
Yep.
And Lazada wasn't reaching out to small merchants yet.
Nope.
Not in 2015. So it was a great learning experience because Shopee at the time was me, Karen, the head of operations, I believe is still there, great operations person, one other person, and 2 interns.
What?
And when we first launched the app, it was like, okay, we have our first set of orders. What do we do? Because everything was on. It was like we're literally reaching out personally to online sellers. I was on the ground at any event that would have any bazaar, any event that would have sellers. We were there on the ground, like going around guerrilla style on booths, handing out flyers, like, "Oh, you should try selling on Shopee." They were like, "What?"
What? Now it's a household name, but wow, what were the main 0 to 1 stuff that you guys had to that you remember doing, especially in BD? If your target was 20, how did you go from 0 to 20, and what was the formula that you guys unlocked? Because obviously Shopee never looked back, and you only stayed here for 11 months. But what you did in that 0 to 1 for sure was monumental to get them to the next phase.
Right. When we started, we were 5 people. When I left, we were 120. So it was a great experience.
What the hell? That scale. Okay.
Great. It was a crazy ride. And so I remember at the first, so it might sound like the targets were really small, like 20 a day, right?
Yeah.
But that's the first week. The target for the second week was 40 a day. The target for the third week was 80 a day.
100x week on week?
Week on week. It wasn't month on month. It was week on week. And
that was crazier than YC. YC is happy at 5 to 7%. Iterative is happy at 5 to 7% week on week. You guys were 100x?
Yep.
What?
So that was great pressure because you imagine trying to build an environment where you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do in the first place, at the same time building a team and trying to keep up with 100% growth every single week.
That's a startup mentality right there. That's how the big platforms think. So if you're a local founder, you're listening to this, hello, I'm okay now. I have 2. That's cool, right? But that's a lifestyle business. You can be king of your own thing. But if you want scale, this is how fast startups. So how did you keep up? What are the things you had to do to hit those 100x week on week?
I think the first thing I realized very, very quickly, after sleeping at 4 a.m. every day for like a month, was like, okay, there's no keeping up with 100% growth. You have to build your team. And that's the first priority. It doesn't matter if everything else is on fire, right? If
Yeah.
you're trying to keep up with this massive like glut of work,
Yep.
well, the first thing you do is get extra hands on board and getting the right hands on board. So that's something that I really appreciated in BCG and also with Shopee and also my own startup is as you get more senior in your organization, the more of your time is spent working not just the problem, but the people.
Yes.
Because the people are real what helps you scale. If you, as a founder, are the only one solving problems for your organization, you're going to run out of scale really, really quickly. And so I spent probably half my time hiring, trading, dealing with people, and trying to get them up to speed really quickly rather than spending that time trying to solve the problems myself.
Yep.
Because you can't.
No, that's true. That's also I would totally agree. Because that one of the first mistakes of a first time founder is you want to be the jack of all trades, king of none. Right? You can be that, but at one point in 0 to 1, if you want to go fast, yes, you need to validate. But as soon as you already have traction or see that there's a pattern of success, actually, before you even get there, you should already know what type of people you should hire, because that's how you scale it up. There's no way you can scale up your hustle alone. You need to fire yourself in a lot of the things that you do because that's the only thing. And when you fire yourself, think not in positions. Think of business unit. How big will this team get? What type of people do I need? Do I need to? Because the other thing that always people go through is like, do I go after the cheap fresh grads, or do I go after the big ones? For me, I think it depends. If you have the stamina to still hone people up and go through the learning curve, go ahead, go for cheap. That's also the best people that you can literally mold to become superstars down the road. But if you're older and you don't have that thing, and you kind of have hindsight being 2020, you need people who you can build around on. Because if you don't, you're gonna be dealing with a little. I don't know what to do. I'm stressed out. No. You're also gonna have to buffer yourself out over these people issues as well.
Yeah, it's a really funny balance between building the people and trying to solve the big problems and just having to deal with the small ones.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started doing integration with LBC at the time, because LBC was the only game in town for delivery of the day.
Correct.
And when we first did integration, like half the office at the end of every month was in the LBC warehouse. Watching the pickers and packers, because otherwise all the orders, like if you're at 100% growth, right, every week,
never going to be delivered.
They're never going to be delivered on time, and that was always the headache, right? And for us in BD, a lot of our work was finding sellers and having sellers bring on board their own customers, because you can have a great app and a great experience, but if you don't have the right merchandise and the right customer base, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of our job was literally finding any single way or means that it was possible to find the right sellers to join the platform and get them to bring their customers on board. And that was a really fun journey, because it was every week it's like, okay, how are we going to find the next 100, 200, 300 sellers to come on board? And until we even got to the point within the 11 months that we actually used up the entire Instagram e-commerce in the Philippines. There's literally nobody who fit our qualification anymore, because we've gone through everyone. We're literally just scraping from Instagram, like, okay, this is an online seller. Let's see everyone who they follow and everyone who follows them. And let's go through that chain day by day, by day by day. And at one point, we're like, oh no, we can't find any sellers who have more than 10,000 followers anymore. So we went to 5,000. Then we went to 3,000. Then we went to 1,000. They're like, oh no, we have literally gone through the entire Philippines e-commerce ecosystem in 6 months.
Oh my God. So you have to really create that value chain already. It just because whatever out there doesn't exist. But last question now before we take our last break. you were going through that crazy Shopee ride. And I think there's only a small sliver of opportunity for you to either take a jump, because if you stay there for long, you're going to be a lifer. Okay. And, or stay there for a very long time. What made you want to do the jump 11 months in? And how did that turn to Ruralnet?
So that's a funny story because, and then again, a very unique situation with Ruralnet is because I actually don't wear one hat. I wear two hats. I also run a family-owned real estate company out of Cebu. We're actually quite a large luxury real estate developer in Cebu.
Which one? What is it called?
Called Arcenas Properties.
Got it.
So we're developing 25 hectares of greenfield development out of Cebu City in the south, residential. But that's not small business either. So my family was in a position where they needed help, and they said, "Oh, come home now. Like, we definitely need help with this. You've been out for years and years and years." So I bargained with them as like, "Okay, I want to come home, but only after I handle something with P&L responsibility." And that for me was Shopee.
Got it.
I had a year to play around with the P&L that was not on my dime.
Got it.
So it's a great opportunity to have that 0 to 100 mindset, to deal with all the problems of running a huge team and scale, because nobody trains you how to do that. And I think coming out of consulting, you're great at working the problem, but running a business,
totally different thing.
P&L, like growing a team, that's a skill set that you don't get out of consulting.
Correct.
That's something you only get from working in a high growth environment in a startup that's going through that same path. And I think if you join Shopee today, you would not get that experience, for example. No. Very, very different.
There's only a small window where you can get that.
Yep. So I was lucky enough to be on that journey from 0 to 100. And then I got back to Cebu to help out with the family business, as well as start helping out with a small social impact side business called Ruralnet. That was really meant to be a social impact business, not really a venture-backed company. So this was not done out of a sense of, we're going to build something that covers. Right now, we cover 2% of the Philippine population, which is utterly insane to me.
Right. There's so much more.
Ambition.
All right. Sounds good. Now let's take our last break, and when we come back, obviously, we're going to be talking about Ruralnet and how that came from a social impact company to then become a venture-backed company into now the new North Star of what that looks like. And of course, how they were able to raise from Kickstart and more. Let's talk about that more after the break.
Hey hustlers, wish there was an easy way to open a bank account and grow your money without the hassle of lengthy application process and income documents? Well, I got good news because today's sponsor, Uno Digital Bank, is here to help you achieve your financial goals. You can easily open an account with the Uno app in just 5 minutes and one valid ID. And as one of the 6 digital banks licensed by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, the company is committed to providing customers with simpler, better, and more accessible banking. Last year, Uno Bank was recognized by the Asia Banking and Finance Awards and bagged the title Open Banking Initiative of the Year due to the success of its partnership with GCash, one of the Philippines' leading mobile wallet platforms. And with the Uno mobile app, you can access an hashtag Uno Ready savings account and enjoy daily interest crediting. With their hashtag Uno Earn or hashtag Uno Boost time deposit accounts, you can enjoy a high interest rate of up to 6.5% per annum. Enjoy monthly payouts with hashtag Uno Earn and flexible tenors with hashtag Uno Boost. Other app features include pay bills, the Uno Virtual Debit MasterCard, life insurance, scan and pay with QRPH, and phones. And the one thing that I really love about Uno Digital Bank is they're open to collaborate with a lot of Filipino startups. I've had a chance to see the partnerships that they've had lined up with the startups that they have, and it's truly exciting to see how a digital bank like Uno can enable startups to unlock the power of fintech through digital banking. So if you're ready to elevate your banking experience, download the Uno mobile app today from the Google Play Store or App Store. Or if you want to collaborate with them, I'll be happy to give you an intro. Just shoot us an email at hello@hustleshare.com. Hey hustlers, how many apps are you using at work these days? 5, 10, 20? Let's face it, there are chat apps for internal communication and emails for external. Cloud Drive for docs and wikis, calendars and video conferencing, spreadsheets and project management software, and probably yet another tool to connect them all. It is a mess. And if you're collaborating with cross-border colleagues, partners, or suppliers, it gets even more complicated. And don't you find it disruptive when your personal and business messages get mixed up? And if this sounds painfully familiar, switch to Lark, the leading super app for work designed to increase your team's productivity by 10x at an unbelievable fraction of the cost. With Lark, manage projects, chat with your team, build a knowledge base with wikis, and automate workflows such as approvals without code effortlessly from one app. No switching or integration needed. Join fast-growing companies in over 125 countries, including Xiaomi, Glint, and the Philippines' very own Kumu and Mama Lou's, who trust Lark as their workplace super app. I've started using Lark myself for our pressure washing business service, Pop-Up Pressure, and I'm totally loving it. Want to see how Lark can revolutionize your business? Click the link in the description or download Lark for free at larksuite.com. That's larksuite.com, the productivity super app every business needs.
And we're back from the break. We are still with Justin Arcenas, who then told us the amazing journey of, again, working in BCG and, of course, hustling in Shopee 0 to 120. There you go. Amazing. But, Justin, I now want to understand a couple of things, right? So, you mentioned Ruralnet was just supposed to be a side hustle, per se. It's good. But at the main conceptualization of it, what did it stand for? What was the problem you guys were trying to solve, and why was it called the Ruralnet? Because when I hear Ruralnet, it's like rural internet. Is that what it means? So what is it? What was the idea behind it?
Right. So it's actually Ruralnet was actually not entirely started by me. Like the current iteration of it was started by me, but Ruralnet actually comes from my dad's dream, which was, as a rural banker, he wanted to have the rural areas have the same access to opportunities that the urban areas did.
Okay.
And this was way back, right? 2007, 2008, where connectivity in rural areas was still a huge barrier.
Yeah.
And what he wanted to do was to use the internet and all these emerging technologies to enable rural banks to keep up with commercial banks and thrift banks, and to be able to serve rural communities in the same way.
Okay.
And it was also the core banking system provider of our own bank, which we sold back in 2014 when the BSP started rolling up small banks into bigger banks and increasing capitalization. So when I came back in 2016, I had this little orphan institution, which had a tech platform, it had a core banking system, but its major customer, our own bank, had been sold. And obviously that got rolled up into a bigger institution. So they had their own core banking system. And so I was left with an organization maraming sayang, right? There were good people in place. There's some technology in place. There's a great mission and vision in place, but not necessarily a clear direction on where it should be going next. And that was the state of Ruralnet when I came back in 2016. And I took one look at that and said, okay, given all my knowledge about startups and what we were doing in Jakarta and reaching out to all the people at, for example, Kudo and Ruma, who were doing a lot of work in rural areas, I started thinking, what are the things that I could take from my experience outside, coming back to the earlier point, right, of seeing what's out there, and that I could bring back here and utilize the assets that were already there to do the same thing, while still staying true to the mission and vision of connecting the countryside. And we ended up as an insurtech startup, but we didn't start up as an insurtech startup.
Okay.
We tried a whole bunch of different things. At the time, uso pa nun yung agent banking, a concept which we figured out, 5-6 years later doesn't really work.
Right? That's hard to scale.
It's very hard to scale profitably. You can scale it, it just isn't profitable at any point. So we started out trying to do that, working out with government services in rural areas, which was successful but limited more by government than it was by the how the adoption was working.
Okay.
But one of those small side businesses was insurance, right? And it's not something that you really think about when you think about the countryside and low income families. But it's absolutely something that was really important. And for a lot of people who aren't familiar, microinsurance is actually one of the most developed micro segments here in the Philippines.
Okay.
And the Philippines is one of the leaders in the world when it comes to microinsurance.
Got
But
it.
it's coming from a position of social impact from the NGO perspective.
What were they insuring? I mean, what when you talk about micro insurance, what are you insuring?
So one of the people I really respect from both a business and the social impact standpoint is Dr. Aris Alip of CARD, MRI. So
Mhm.
CARD is one of the biggest microfinance groups here in the Philippines. They serve 8 million people, which is its own story of scale and hustle.
Wow, it's amazing.
But from the NGO side. And the way that it started, the way I hear it from him, was when he started doing microinsurance, it was a really simple concept.
Okay.
We're going to ask for 5 pesos per person per week, and we're going to put it all in a common pool.
Okay.
And if somebody dies, we're going to pay whatever's in the pool to that person as a means of helping them out. It's just a community thing to help out.
Mhm.
And that was massively popular with their
Like
microfinance.
paluwagan.
Paluwagan.
Mhm.
Exactly. But then it raises all sorts of problems, right? Where, okay, if you're lucky enough and it's been piling up for a while, you get a huge payout. If you die the next day after somebody else dies, wala na. You don't get much.
Yeah.
So they start putting fixed amounts, but without an actual underwriter, it becomes really messy. You start losing money. So
Right.
that whole education and iteration was actually something that came out of the social impact community. And it comes from that local nuance we were talking about, right? Which is how do we help these families who don't have enough money
Mhm.
get savings? They don't have enough money to put aside for a rainy day. How can we help them in their time of need in a way that's financially sustainable for them? And so all of the design work was coming from the local nuance. And once that local nuance was figured out, then they said, okay, let's spread it across our own networks, across the microfinance industry. And now that's something that's a 12 billion peso a year industry, right? From that tiny seed of let's all put together 5 pesos a week in case somebody dies, from a very simple concept.
Yeah.
And what I saw with Ruralnet was if the NGOs can do this, why can't the rural banks do this, right? And so I was trying to fit their context into my context and seeing what are the small things that I need to tweak to make that work for the rural banking sector. And then the more I dug into it, I was realizing, okay, if you're coming from an NGO perspective, you're solving a lot of the human and the social aspect of this.
Mhm.
But because they're not profit, their only goal was let's make this sustainable, right? Let's make the numbers and it's good enough.
Eventually you plateau and you're happy with that.
Yeah, and it's not about making money. It's like if I've covered 100,000, 200,000 people, that's a success in itself. I'm helping those people out.
Right.
But coming from the private sector, I was like, yes, but could you be doing more to help these people out? Could you be making the process better, faster, cheaper, more accessible for these customers? So bringing that private sector drive for excellence while still maintaining that social impact lens that people have. And eventually, insurance was one of 5 arms of things that we were doing.
Mhm.
And after the first year of pilots, it was 90 something percent of our business. At which point I was like,
Nice.
I guess we're an insurtech startup now.
Okay.
And I think that's the second lesson in this is that when product market fit happens and you fall into it, don't fight the current, right?
Yep. Right
Like,
away.
it's not gonna go.
How did you know that you guys had product market fit? Because here's the thing: a lot of people have misnomer, and not to anyone's fault, but people always say, "Na, yeah, we have product market fit." And you realize you don't. So for us, like little things, like for Podcast Network Asia, we have this platform called Pod Machine, where technically we automate the whole podcast post production process end to end. We have a chatbot or I have a platform that people literally just go there and drop those files easily. We had to upgrade our system for a week and go to Facebook Messenger semi mano mano while we're doing that for a week. And that whole week, I'd say 90+% of our clients were going bananas like, hey, when is this going to be back up? When is this going to be back up? When is this going to be back up? We didn't realize that was how vital it was until we had to like temporarily shut it down for a while. That's how we knew we had product market fit, because there's even this thing about Sean Ellis that if you do a survey and 40% of those people that you ask if what will you be able to find a replacement, or will you be extremely like lost if your product didn't exist, and 40% said yes, then you have product market fit. But in your context, what did product market fit feel like, and how did you ride the wave?
Right. So I guess let me start out with Ruralnet. We have two customers. We're a B2B2C startup, right? Okay. So we work together with financial institutions who cross-sell our products, and we also work with the end clients in terms of claim servicing, okay, right? And let me start with the end clients because it's something that's in between both social impact and startup scaling.
Okay.
For the first 3 years of running the company, the CS team and I called every single claimant that we had at the end of the year.
Wow.
Around Christmas time. Every single person. And we're like, hey, thank you for being one of our customers. We're really sorry that X has happened to you, but we wanted to hear from you personally and ask you what we did well, what we could have done better, and what the roadblocks were in the process that you had with us. And every single year, the answers to my questions never ceased to surprise me. There are so many roadblocks that we didn't see, so many speed bumps that we could have avoided. But for me, product market fit, we could tell we had it when we started calling the customers around year 4 in, and they started saying, no, we love the process. It was great.
Wow. These are the same people.
These were different people because obviously, like when it's insurance, like people die once, right? Or they end up making a claim. It's not every year that somebody makes a claim. But we could see product market fit evolving as we called these customers. And, if we were already seeing as early as like year 1 that people were having a better experience than they had with other providers. Nice. But they still had all these roadblocks that were coming to them. And year by year, the roadblocks would change because we'd fix like, okay, if problems A, B, and C were what people were having, next year it was D, E, and F, and then G, H, and I.
Yeah.
Every time we fix stuff, we always found there's always more stuff that you want to fix. There's always ways that you can make the process better. But they were never the things that we came up with in the office, especially working with low-income households.
Got it.
And let me give a very real example. One thing in insurance, and this is the most boring term, is called pre-existing conditions. Right? If you're sick and you buy an insurance plan, let's say you have cancer and you buy an insurance plan and you die within the first year of getting your policy, you can't make a life claim because you were sick, right? So the problem with that is when we started talking to end consumers and taking that concept and bringing it to the bottom of the pyramid. And so we called the customer and after our first year and we're asking them, hey, you were denied a claim for us, but we still want to hear from you, like what the experience was like and what we can do better. Obviously, aside from like approving the claim, because your dad had cancer and we really couldn't pay out that claim, but it was very clear because he died like 2 months after the policy was issued. So he was sick well before that. It's stage 4 cancer. It doesn't pop up in 2 months, right?
Yeah.
And the customer goes to us and says, we're still really mad about that because we didn't know he had cancer. And I was like, what? Like, but the doctor's letter clearly says it was stage 4. He'd had it for years.
Yeah.
They're like, we're farmers. Do you think we go to the hospital? Do you think we ever get checked up?
Yeah.
We never knew he had cancer. As far as I was concerned, he had a upset stomach. He went to the hospital and 2 days later he was dead.
My God.
And when we were solving for that kind of problem, we were thinking, oh my God, how it's this super basic, like it's core to every insurance product, but it doesn't work for the bottom of the pyramid because they never get checked up. And it's not something you can penalize them for or you can even market towards, because how can you tell someone that they can't avail of it if they're previously sick when they don't know that they're sick?
Correct.
That's just a horrible customer experience and a terrible social impact one too.
Yeah.
And so we have to really go back to the drawing board with all of our products and like, okay, how do we fix this? How do we create something for the first time that's inclusive for that kind of customer?
Wow. That's amazing. Now, this is an amazing approach to how you guys did it, but I'll channel your inner Shopee guy as well, because you cannot do this alone. And I'm pretty sure you already had that experience. How did you build a team up for you to be able to do that? Because again, these are nuances that you cannot catch on your own as a founder. What type of team did you assemble as you built this along?
Right. So from the very start, I looked for people who had both experience as well as the heart to do what we're doing. It had to be a little bit of both. It couldn't be one or the other. And I built a senior management team of people who were believed in what we did. And I think the only reason I was able to hire a lot of these guys is because we had that mission. If I were just a regular corporation, nobody cares really about stock options, especially at that time, 2016. Nobody would even know what stock options are, right? For these kinds of things. And they wouldn't value them if they did. And so I was looking for people who believed in the vision that we had to make a difference in the lives of low-income Filipinos so that they would join that journey together with me and grow along with the company. So that was one thing. We made sure that the senior management team were very firm believers in what we were doing. And the second thing that was very important is that everyone was on the ground at one point. So when we designed the products, my personal opinion and something that all of my staff members know is that I will not listen to your opinion about a specific product feature unless you've talked to some of our customers about it.
I like that.
Because it's very easy to design from an ivory pyramid, especially with social impact work, right?
Correct.
So everything I always ask is like, okay, it sounds good, but have you validated it by talking to some people on the ground?
Right.
And that's why until now, anyone who's in a product making capacity in the company has to go through an immersion with our bottom of the pyramid customers. They go to the center meetings. They see the people who are taking out microfinance loans, who are buying our products. They see how the financial literacy work is being done. Because I've gotten all sorts of suggestions that are great from a product perspective. People are like, why don't we build this feature and this feature? Why don't we allow self-service claims online? I'm like, okay, these are all great ideas. Go and talk to our end customers. And I think during one of our surveys, like 20% of them don't even have a smartphone, which is wild.
How are they going to make a claim if it's self-service?
And how are they going to use the self-service portal, right?
Exactly.
You tell me. Go and talk to them, and you tell me if it's still a good idea. And half the time, they'll come back and say, oh, you know what? You're right. That's a terrible idea. But half the time, they actually come back and say, no, we've talked to the customers, and they love it. And I'm like, great. That's how you know you have market fit. You actually ask the end consumer. And that's always been a firm belief of mine, is that you can't go wrong with just asking the people who use your product on a regular basis how they feel about it. They won't always give you the right answer, but they'll give you direction at least on whether what you're thinking about makes sense or not. Then you see what people are actually using to sort of narrow that down to something that actually fits inside the product pipeline.
That is amazing. And that thing also never goes old, because at the end of the day, it's always a cycle. It's a cycle of iteration, feedback, and adjustments. And the only thing actually you're going to have to do is every time you do that iteration, that cycle, the question is, do you pivot because it didn't work, or you persevere? And maybe after a certain number of perseveres, that's how you kind of know that you already have product market fit. But last question now before we let you go, because we're running out of time. You mentioned that at the start, this was just a social impact play. It wasn't venture. It wasn't a VC play. When did that change, and how did that lead to Kickstart and everybody else investing in you to that the round you've raised last year?
Right. So I think I mentioned a while back that I've known Joanne and the Kickstart folks for a very long time. I think you're part of the first fund. That was like, what, 16?
2014, 2013, 2014. Yeah.
2013, 2014. So I knew Joan only a few years after you did. And so, again, the Philippine startup community at the time was very, very small.
Yep.
I
Too
think
many local dudes, not enough PhilAms to actually freaking show that it's possible.
I remember when I first came back, like literally the only startups that had any sort of external funding to a significant amount were
Caliber.
Caliber and Coins. That was it.
Yep. That's
That
it.
is the sum total.
The rest were us.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember talking to John at the time and getting to know the community. And I always had the thought that, maybe this is something that would work in a venture back if we wanted to make a big play and continue to grow the company. But every time we talked with people who could be potential investors or mentors, they were like, oh, it's too early. Or, it's not something that has shown product market fit or scale. So it's very helpful very early on to figure out who's in the community and get that input from them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was very valid feedback at the time where we didn't have the kind of explosive growth and scale that we needed to have in order to raise a venture-backed company. Especially with all the restrictions I had. Right? I have two roles in senior management for two companies, plus the fact that we're also a social impact business. And so my mindset at the time was I wanted to make this huge impact, but at the same time, I need to be able to build a company that doesn't need the venture capital. It can take it, it can scale with it. But if the tap of money turns off at any point, it's not going to go.
It's going to be okay. Yeah.
And so that mindset, in the late 2010s, early 2020s, especially with hyperscaling and everyone focusing on let's get to 1 million customers as fast as possible, regardless if you burn millions of dollars along the way, wasn't a very popular mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something I did firmly believe in because I do think at some point you have to prove at least positive unit economics before you build anything at scale. It's very easy to scale something when your unit economics are inherently negative.
Exactly.
And so that's what I built, was a company where I have the opportunity to use venture-backed money to scale, but at the same time, it's a business that was sustainable and possibly profitable at scale from day one.
Nice.
And when we built that, when you come from that mindset of creating something that will drive that kind of value, you build something that is not reliant on the whims of the market.
Right.
I'm quite proud of that. And I think that's why when we fundraised in 2023, it was from a position of strength, not from a position of, I need to take a check because if
we're dying.
Not, we're going to die. Right? I need to take a check within the next 2 months. I remember pitching to Johan and saying, hey, we're cash flow and net profit positive, but we can do so much more if we get funding. And this is exactly what we're going to spend that money on. And this is exactly how we're going to continue to scale the business. But you can see that the model works. And if I don't get funding, it's not going to be the lights out. It's going to be that I'm going to grow, 10, 20% a year and have a profitable and sustainable business. So I can walk away from the deal.
Yes.
I want to. And negotiating from that position of strength gave me a lot more flexibility in terms of how I could structure my fundraise, how I could define my strategy, and how I could work around my valuations as well.
That is completely amazing. That's rare, by the way, because most of the time people, again, F it up. Fundamentally, their P&L, their unit echo are fucked up. But last question before I let you go, right? So from that point on, now, of course, you're now able to achieve this war chest because you don't have a bleeding business. You've figured out how to cash flow, how to be EBIT, whatever that metric, all in the black, no reds, right? What are you then able to use these funds for? And how did you scale it up faster without going into the red zone? Because again, if fundamentals are good, if you scale those fundamentals that are good, it should scale still in the black. But now at VC or startup scale, what did you do next?
So coming back to a point of earlier, I've been a firm believer that it's not, half my job is not building the business, but half my job is building the team that can build the business. And that was the first thing that we did with the fundraise. I was like, okay, now I can hire the right people that I need to take the company to the next 5 to 10x.
Nice.
And how do I build the tech infrastructure that will take us to the next 5, 10x? How we build the sales pipeline, how we build the internal capabilities and product pipeline that will take to get to the next 5, 10x. So that funding, that war chest, all went towards building, kumbaga, this additional fixed cost.
Yep.
That while it's a short-term burn, it's a short-term investment into that, is an investment into the future, into that growth that you have, so that when you hit your 5 to 10x, you're not going to choke on it.
Yep.
And so that's what that war chest was for. And I think having a very clear vision of where exactly you're going to be spending the money, but also I think what a lot of founders don't think about is where you can get off the train, right? Because venture capital is a treadmill that you get on. And if you don't know what your goal is, you're going to be running that treadmill for the rest of your life. There's always more that you can raise. There's always higher growth that you can have. You know, even when you get to the point that you're a Grab or a Shopee or a Gojek, there's always more to have. There's always further rounds to reach out to, unless you have a clear exit strategy as well. That you can articulate to investors and to yourself. Then it allows you to have a sort of vision of, okay, what do I need to build in order to get to that exit point? And you may not want to exit at that point, right? You may want to stay on, may want to own a profitable company, you may want to IPO, whatever it might be, right? But having a clear vision of where you could exit also gives you the confidence to say, this is exactly what I need to build over the next 5 years to get to that point. What do I need to have in place in terms of business, in terms of team, in terms of customers, that someday I can step out from the company, step aside, and then have it be something that lasts. And not a company that's solely dependent on yourself as the founder. Because I think that's a very unhealthy cult that we've built around founders these days. Is that, you know, people are like, oh, you have this genius founder that's set up, and if not for him, the company would never have grown to this size. And that's true from 0 to 100. But from 100 to 1,000, from 1,000 to 3,000 to 10,000, that's, if you're still reliant on your founder for everything at that point, I truly believe that you're doing something wrong.
Absolutely. Because if the founders cannot play the hero ball, I always say it with my team, don't play hero ball. Because all the heroes in the Philippines, whatever happened to them when they tried to be a hero, they all died, right? So when you play hero ball and you don't play team and you don't play, we're building this to last, where in the end, we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. Rather than someone playing hero ball, and in the end, you're just gonna die again. Justin, I hope we had more time, but this is amazing, and definitely we'll have you on. But before I let you go, invite people over if they want to work with you and if they want to check out your products in Ruralnet. Where do they go and how do they do that?
Right. So a bit of a funny story, because in terms of our products, we're bottom of the pyramid. So I'm pretty sure none of the people listening to this podcast will ever touch or see one of my products.
Yeah.
But do check us out at ruralnet.ph to see some of the great work that we've been doing across the Philippines. We're always looking for talent in business development and software. You can reach out to me through LinkedIn if you're looking for opportunities. And we're always looking for people who have the heart to try and solve some of the tough problems that are facing the Philippine poor. And if you have the heart for that and you want to join us in our journey, please do reach out.
That is amazing. But before I let you go, follow us on whatever podcast app we're listening to, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if we did say some jargon, it's going to be in the show notes on hustleshare.com. And again, big thank you to all our premium supporters, our brands that support Hustleshare that keep the lights on so that I can keep talking to you. Big shout out to all of you. But if you want to be like them, please do subscribe at premium.hustleshare.com. Again, Justin, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.